Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
If you want to keep up with some of the craziness that's going on in the world, then subscribe to Ryland Media's Twitter account, twitter.com/Ryland Media. I am joined by Chris Williams, former MP, former Labour Party MP, a stalwart of the traditional Labour left, and a big Jeremy Corbyn supporter, as I was and am. And we're just going to have a talk about the state of the UK and the state of the left in the UK, because it's appalling. And Chris, I didn't say to you beforehand, but I voted Brexit, and therefore I am a xenophobe. And I voted Brexit after listening to Tony Benn and George Galloway and other stalwarts of the left. But apparently I'm a racist xenophobe.
Well, that was just a knee-jerk response, wasn't it, from the corporate media and the political class. I mean, I campaigned for Remain and Reform. I mean, frankly, I think I was naive on that. I took the line that Jeremy was promoting at the time, and Jeremy had always been a Eurosceptic himself. I guess he made, I don't know, I've never spoken too much about this, but I think he made a sort of a pragmatic decision to campaign for Remain and Reform. I think reforming the European Union was actually a naive prospect. But at the end of the day, I went along with that, made the point, and at various public meetings, I spoke at a lot of public meetings, that the European Union wasn't fit for purpose. It needed massive restructuring, massive reform. It wasn't working in the interests of working class people. There was huge levels of poverty in the UK. Even though we were inside the European Union, it was effectively, not effective, it was indeed a neoliberal capitalist club, and we needed to change that. I mean, I was making the point there were certain benefits that I felt could potentially be obtained from being, a member of the European Union, working collectively across Europe to, address some of the challenges facing the world. And, if you like, be a force for good. At the end of the day, collaboration is crucially important. You mentioned Tony Benn. I mean, and Tony Benn wasn't an isolationist as such. He was all very keen to actually collaborate with Europe. What he was concerned about was the Treaty of Rome and the imposition of capitalism, as it were. So that was kind of cemented into the whole framework of what used to be the European Economic Community. And there was this ratcheting process whereby, more and more of our public services, for example, were being, pushed out into the private sector. There was a presumption in favour of privatisation. And so therefore, I wasn't sort of, giving the European Union a blank check, far from it, saying, it certainly wasn't fit for purpose and needed reform. But I was saying, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think I was wrong. I wish I'd campaigned on the other side. However, having said that, when the result came through, I mean, I wasn't crestfallen in any way, shape or form, and said, well, look, this now gives us an opportunity, actually, as a country. We're no longer going to be subjected to the vagaries of, the state aid rules and things like that are imposed from the European Union. We are at that point in time, they were the fifth biggest economy. We're now the sixth biggest economy in the world. We issue our own currency. That was one of probably the only good thing that Gordon Brown did, was keeping us out of the Eurozone, because that gives us huge flexibility as a nation with our own sovereign currency, particularly a sovereign currency in a powerful economy like Britain's is. So consequently, money is no object. And what I was saying is that, look, let's then now use this opportunity of being outside the European Union, being free from the shackles of those, as I've already said, the state aid rules and things like that. And use that to, as a force for good. I mean, and I was making this point actually, funnily enough, in the fag end of my period as a member of the Labour Party and a Labour MP, and I was arguing at parliamentary Labour Party meetings that, look, what we should be saying is, we will get Brexit done. Don't just cede that ground to the Tories, to Theresa May and to Boris Johnson. Let's say we'll get Brexit done. But the difference is, what we should be saying is that we'll deliver a people's Brexit, not a banker's Brexit. Yeah. That's the difference. But because we ceded that ground, we gave the opportunity then for Boris Johnson, of all people, a pillar of the establishment, to present himself as the anti-establishment figure, the man of the people. What utter nonsense was that? And I'm afraid to say, on the last meeting that I addressed at the Parliamentary Labour Party, it was 2 days before I was suspended on a nonsense pretext about anti-Semitism and so on, that I was facilitating that, and I was bringing the party into disrepute. I was making that point, and I was absolutely howled down, not just shouted down, howled down by hundreds of Labour MPs and peers. And indeed, one MP walked out mid my speech, as it were. I mean, this was all being reported on by the media who were assembled outside, and they were, he was kind of doing a running commentary. Chris Williamson on his feet, he's being jeered and shouted down, raising his voice. We can hear so much that we can hear every word that he's saying. And then he said, one prominent Labour MP just walked out saying, "I can't listen to any more of that CUNT." And then finished off by saying, this is the PLP in action, folks, Parliamentary Labour Party in action, folks. That was how the media was portraying. So it made us look like a rabble, and that's what we were. But, some of them were Europhiles. Some of them, I think, genuinely did believe in the European Union, think it was a force of good. But I think that's because they're neoliberals at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Chris, I think a lot of them, just finish on this point, a lot of them use that as a wedge and as a stick to beat Jeremy Corbyn, and another way of, if you like, delivering the coup de grace to the Corbyn project, because they knew that if Labour went into that next election, which they did, with a commitment to another referendum, that was curtains for the Labour Party. Ridiculous.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, what you're alluding to is, I think, a really important question. Where is the left? We've had lockdowns which have crushed the working class. We've had the British government, a so-called Tory government, putting in policies that are going to impoverish people further, destroying small businesses, which is the biggest employer in the UK, taking away people's liberties and freedom, spending our money on killing people in the Ukraine. And where is the left?
It's nowhere. Well, it's nowhere if we're thinking of the left as being represented by the Labour Party. The Labour Party's finished. I mean, maybe it always was a doomed project from the get-go, really. Certainly from the extension of the franchise, as I've made this point on numerous occasions, in 1918. I mean, the first Labour government, betrayed the working class, actually. That was that first Labour government in the 1920s. The Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, the Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer, it was a minority Labour government, a chap called Philip Snowden, and he talked about the pressure that they were coming under from the wild men of the left, as he described them, to introduce or to try to bring in through Parliament a fully fledged socialist programme, but knowing full well that they wouldn't be able to get it through. And he was making this point. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what he was saying, but he was saying, look, they want us to do that so that we can then go back to the country and say, look, this is what we want to do, but the Tories and the Liberals, voted out, preventing it, so give us a mandate. And then he goes on to say, but we're not going to do that. And his overriding ambition, his overriding priority was to gain the trust of, the respect from the corporate elites, the corporate capitalist elites, the establishment in the country. That was more important to the Labour Party, even back then, over 100, not quite already, nearly 100 years ago. And that nothing's really changed. I mean, even that 1945 Labour government, which made a massive transformation in the country, introduced the post-war consensus that stood the test of time for getting on for 34 years. They could have gone a lot further. The zeitgeist was in the right place to go further. Certainly, their foreign policy was dreadful. Actually, I mean, their domestic policy was good, but could have been better. And so it's been all the way through. The Wilson government, supporting the Vietnam War, thankfully kept British troops out of that. Right the way through to Tony Blair and so on, supporting George Bush, and basically going along with the neoliberal reforms that Thatcher brought in. And indeed, Thatcher's quoted, I'm sure you're familiar with it, her greatest achievement was Tony Blair and New Labour. And Tony Blair himself said, look, my job isn't to tear anything down that Thatcher did. My job is to build on her achievements. What achievements? I mean, shocking. So where is the left now? Well, the left is it's lost. I mean, I think it's been upset. Well, the Labour Party's totally, has kind of lost the plot. We need to build outside that. But I think beyond that, actually, there's a lot on the left, and there's a big, reset, if you like, that needs to take place, because, a lot of people, on the left, they become obsessed with identity politics.
Yes. And,
identity politics are a safe bet for the corporate capitalist class. And that's why you have that, revolting spectacle of the Pride March albeit in the States, but you've got companies like Raytheon, marching, quite happily to, as it were, embrace the whole kind of LGBTQ agenda, whilst at the same time making these mass weapons of destruction, inflicting untold suffering on developing countries around the world. And so, when you have that sort of spectacle, and you then had, people like Boris Johnson was saying, we've got the most diverse cabinet in history. Well, yes, they got more women, maybe more black and brown faces around the table, but they weren't the most diverse cabinet. They still represented, the 0.1% of society.
Well, Chris, if I can come in,
that's a big problem. Sorry, yeah,
big problem. Because people were celebrating Barack Obama. I'm like, no, he's bombed so many countries: Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Somalia.
But Obama's a war criminal. I mean, I think he dropped more bombs than George Bush. than George Bush did,
The twin of Tony Blair. But Chris, please, I completely get what you're saying about identity politics. By the way, I was in the anti-apartheid movement when I was 18. I joined that.
Yeah.
Then I went to the City of London anti-apartheid movement because they were more radical. And then I was appalled by BLM. And what gave away BLM for me was the corporate support. Corporates aren't interested in grassroots movements. And it's the same thing with the identity politics. But where can someone like myself, who's left-wing, who's libertarian, who wants people to be able to make their own determinations about their lives, there's nowhere for us to go to. So I find myself agreeing with what UKIP are saying, agreeing with what the Heritage Party are saying. I find myself disagreeing with Green Party because they're saying, climate change, but no one's calling out the biggest environmental disaster of all, which is printing money to mine metals, to manufacture weapons, fly them across the world, and drop them on people. And the Green Party says they want a negotiated settlement, but at the same time, they're supporting Ukraine. So
the Green Party's been totally taken over, it seems to me, by corporate interests again. They've embraced NATO now, which is obviously a force for bad in the world, of course. Yeah. I mean, it's not something which it's not a defensive alliance in any way, shape, or form. But no, it is interesting that we sometimes find ourselves agreeing with the people on the left with some aspects of what people are saying on the right. And I think George Galloway has been criticised because he went along with Nigel Farage's position, obviously on Europe, agreed with him on that point. But Tony Benn, shared platforms with Enoch Powell in the 1970s when the referendum took place about whether Britain should continue its membership of the European Economic Community. They're the forerunner to the European Union. So did people like Michael Foot, Peter Shaw, Barbara Castle. These were kind of very, very big beasts, as it were, in the Labour movement on the left, as it were. I didn't make them out and out kind of right-wing racists like Enoch Powell because they agreed with him on that point. And I just think, what I've been saying, and certainly as far as the left is concerned, what I've said is that we need to be, as it were, agree where we agree, and have fraternal disagreements where we don't. I mean, and that's been a major stumbling block, actually, for some people. I mean, I joined the Workers' Party now, which is led by George Galloway, the Resist movement, which I helped to found after the 2019 election. And it's not a big movement; it's only a small acorn, but it is a movement there, as it's a group. And we were initially looking to see if we could join forces with the Socialist Labour Party. Initially, actually, when we established the Resist movement, there was no ambition to create a new political party, because my view was that the most important thing was to try and capture that essence of the Corbyn movement and to try and build that social movement. And if the desire for a political party then grew from the grassroots, then then great, so be it. That would be, I think, a much more of a sustainable situation. However, members of Resist felt that they wanted to accelerate the process and wanted to basically register as a political party. So we looked about registering a political party and creating a name for one. And then a few of us thought, well, why don't we sort of approach the Socialist Labour Party, see whether we could, because that's got a good name, which is familiar to people, as it were. So we probably have a greater chance of cutting through with that. Anyway, we had some various discussions with them, and that was agreed. And then we were in negotiations, discussions for about 11 months, but it never went anywhere. In the end, we pulled out of that and consulted our members again about whether, we've worked closely with the Workers' Party over this period since it was formed. We campaigned formally for for the Workers' Party, Resist campaign for the Workers' Party, when George Galloway stood in the Batman Spain by-election. Why don't we look at hooking up with them? And they certainly would welcome us with open arms, which they have done. So that's where we're at. But I mean, I think that we do need to look at where we can agree and where we can collaborate across the piece. And I know that there is efforts to do this over in the United States as well. And that's, I think, what will really frighten the establishment, as it were. If there is this kind of agreements on some of the key issues, across the kind of political spectrum in that sense. But no, I mean, I do think that where we can agree, let's agree. That's not to say you have to compromise on anything else. I mean, I fundamentally disagree with virtually everything that Nigel Farage stands for in actual fact, and saying, with the kind of the other, the political parties that you've mentioned, and indeed, I've debated with some of them. I mean, and they are, in my opinion, kind of fruitcakes. Actually, I mean, they're just nutters. But they're not. There will be some things where where we can agree, and that why would you not agree with somebody when when they're saying the same thing as you on a particular topic. It's just bonkers. So I think we just need to swallow hard and let's agree where we can agree, as I say. Yeah.
Well, just about them being fruitcakes and nutters, right? So one is, to their credit, I was very involved in the anti-lockdown pro-freedom movement because I could see how it was. I told you I work as a child protection social worker, so I work with the most distressed, disadvantaged families of all. And I noticed how child sexual abuse went through the roof, domestic abuse went through the roof because of that. And then, for the middle classes like you, possibly you, but definitely myself, right? We can work from home, we have computers and all the journalists and everything, and we're okay. But I was like, well, wait a minute. The government doesn't get to say what they can put in my body. The government doesn't get to say that whether me and my family, my children, could go and visit my mother-in-law in Scotland. We're able to make that determination. Nobody cares for my mother-in-law more than my wife and, my children and myself. And then there was nothing from the left, not even the radical left. So then, of course, people will turn to organizations like the Freedom Movement, which are very, very loose, disparate, almost anarchist sort of setups, local decentralized groups. And then along comes the Heritage Party, and along come Dr. Tech's Alliance for Democracy and Freedom and UKIP. Well, of course, people will go to them. And then there's no recognition on the left that I've seen anyway about the influence of the World Economic Forum, how we have, I'm terrified of a Labour government because that would be the WEF on steroids. I see what's happening in Ireland where they're talking of giving migrants the vote in local elections. I mean, that's just insane because then what you have is you have the destruction of local culture. You have the destruction of the working class. There was I don't know if you know what happened in Ltns on Ouse a few months ago under Boris Johnson's proposals. Ltns on Ouse, small village outside York, they were going to deposit, I think, 1,500, I can't remember the exact figure, men from Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria in this little village of 700 people outside York. I was appalled, absolutely appalled. It doesn't serve the men because there's no facilities for them, but it destroys the local community. And why on earth is a Tory government doing it? Well, because it's not Tory policy, it's WEF policy. Because then you have communities set against each other, and you have the destruction of religion and faith and culture, that which gives people an anchor to live by.
I mean, look, I think as far as the whole issue with regard to COVID was concerned, there was a good deal of mission creep. I think the left were probably wrong-footed on the whole issue. There wasn't, I don't think, a coherent response, and I don't think that's just the left in this country. I think there was an issue, across the world. I haven't got a problem with giving migrants a vote, I've got to say. I mean, I think, people come to this country and, they're going to settle here. They will be, ultimately, their children, will be brought up as British citizens. So that doesn't trouble me at all. What I think we need to be looking at, though, is why do people become migrants in the first place? I mean, a lot of that's down to, the sort of policies that have been pursued, the war policies which have been pursued by the West over many years, and the whole issue of colonialism, etc. The way in which countries have been, developing countries have been absolutely.
I'm completely with you on that, right? Because I'm anti-war. You and I were probably on the big anti-Iraq war demo in London, walking shoulder to shoulder with the BNP, who also opposed the war, right? So Muslims and anarchists and socialists and peace lovers and BNP all walking against that war. I'm completely opposed to that. But I spoke to interviewed a woman, former RTE presenter, who told me a bulk of the people coming into Ireland are from Georgia. Georgia's not at war.
No, but I guess people, seek. Why would anybody kind of leave their home, where they know where their friends, their family, their roots are? It have to be driven by extreme circumstances, and I think the way in which.
There's another side to it. Why are so-called conservative governments?
I take that point. But look, I mean, if our social services, if we a properly organised economy in this country that worked for the many, not the few, then these issues wouldn't be as acute as acutely felt as they sometimes are. But I think as a whole, these things are all kind of linked. There needs to be a massive reform, I think, of the way in which we organise the economy in this country and how the riches, the fruits of the economy, how they are dispersed in the country. Across the country. One of the things I was saying at the time of the European Union, after the European Union referendum, when the run into the last election, was that, look, I mean, Britain, as I've already said, is a very powerful, big economy. And the point I was making is that, look, even if the economy were to shrink a little bit, but all of the economic forecasts were suggesting that even if Britain left at that point in time, there was a discussion about whether they're going to be a customs union or whatever, or stop in the European Union or leave without a deal. Leaving without a deal was supposed to be the worst option, sort of economically speaking, in terms of GDP growth. GDP, by the way, is a very crude way of determining the success of the economy because, as I've already said, very powerful economy, fifth as it was then, biggest economy in the world, and yet we've got 14.5 million people in the poverty. So that's not my idea of a success. But the point I was making was that, look, even if the economy were to shrink a bit, if we had a commitment to the redistribution of income and wealth, then we could lift the living standards to the 99%. And that's what a Labour government, that's what a Labour Party should be all about. But so there's that domestic side, but we also need to get our house in order in relation to foreign policy as well, because the reason why people often come to Britain is it's a direct consequence of policies that British governments and British capitalist institutions, etc., corporations, because of the policies that they've pursued, whether it be war, whether it be causing economic hardship in those countries of origin where people have come from in the first instance to seek a better life. So my point that I always used to make and still do on the doorstep is when people were critical of migrants is to say, we don't point your finger of accusation against the migrants. I would say to people, even people who said identified as BNP, and I've never been hit, I've never been told to F off when I've made this point. I always say to those people, hold on, mate, you've got more in common with the people that you're criticising, you've got more in common with the migrants than you have with the people at the top of society in this country, the people who might be British, might have the same colour skin as you. You've got nothing in common with them. The people that are exploiting us, you, and the people that are causing migrants to come to this country are the self-same bloody people. For Christ's sake, lift your eyes above the horizon. Go and blame the victims of the policy decisions that are being made by these super rich oligarchs and governments that support them.
I think I completely agree with you on that, right? But I don't think that model, that rule of thumb, that heuristic applies anymore because we've got right-wing governments, conservative governments doing this, and they're not doing it for the reasons that you and I would.
No, but I mean, so New Labour was doing it as well. I mean, the point is, Labour and the Conservatives and all the political class serve the interests of the ruling elites, of the oligarchy. They're bought and paid for. The same is true to an even greater extent, probably, in the United States of America. I mean, the whole basis, frankly, of the European Union, which we were talking about earlier in our conversation, is to really serve the interests of the corporate elites. And, we need to break out of that. And one of the ways in which I think, we can break out of that is by raising political consciousness, raising people's eyes, above the horizon in that sense. But of course, we are fighting huge odds, really, because all of the propaganda coming from the corporate media, etc., is giving an alternative message. And the trade union movement's been atrophied. It's been attacked for many years. And indeed, one of the things that Tony Blair said that New Labour were going to make some reforms to the trade union legislation, but he said that we'll still have, I think his precise words were something along the lines of, we'll still have the most restrictive trade union laws anywhere in the Western world, as if that was a good thing. But the trade union movement needs to step up to the plate as well. The trade union movement is not doing enough, in my opinion, to raise political consciousness of its members and the wider community. And I think that's where, organised labour, whilst it has been under attack for a long time, and it's not, it's a shadow of its former self in terms of its numbers, it is still a very powerful very powerful body of opinion in the country with substantial resources at their disposal. And I don't think that they are utilising those resources in as effective a way as they could. One is, as I say, to kind of raise political consciousness of its members and the wider community. And secondly, they should be dispensing with any connection with the Labour Party, which is working actively against the interests of working class people in this country. It's attacking working class people in this country, and it's actually signed up to the war machine. And
so what are we to do? Should we join the Workers' Party?
I would urge people to. I would certainly urge people, certainly people who are socialist, oriented, as it were, who are kind of, progressively oriented, to say, yes, certainly consider joining the Workers' Party. Help us to build the Workers' Party. I'm not saying that we're necessarily the Workers' Party is a finished article, but if you look at its 10-point programme, I think it's very sound. It's very clear that it's an anti-imperialist party. It's very clear that it's on the side of the working class. One of the things I'm very keen to push is through the Workers' Party and outside of that is the fact that, Britain has its own sovereign currency. Therefore, money is no object. Therefore, for the government, we can never run out of money. And so the only impediment, frankly, to government investment is the availability of real resources. If there's going to be a big fiscal injection into the economy, will that create inflation and create more problems than it solves? As it were, we can deal with that through the taxation system. If the economy is in danger of overheating, which it is nowhere near actually in danger of overheating, because there's loads of spare capacity in the country, loads of underemployed and unemployed people in the country. There's masses of things that need to be done. The infrastructure is crumbling. The public services are in meltdown. And you may take a different view to me on the issue of climate change. I'm not an expert on this, but I think it's better to err on the side of caution than not. One of the things I think we could be doing, for example, because we are getting more extreme weather events, whether that's down to man-made climate change or not, we know that we're getting more extreme weather events than we have in the past. So consequently, flooding is becoming a bigger problem than it was. There's only so high you can build flood defences, it seems to me. And one of the things I think that could be done, for example, is just one thing. There's many, many other things that could be done with the spare capacity that we have in our economy, is to reforest the uplands. If we were to do that, that would actually hold the water for longer on the uplands, so it would be released much more slowly into the water courses, and therefore that would slow down the potential for flooding to occur downstream. So that would be very labour intensive. And of course, it'd also be a better use of the land, because I'm a vegan as well. So I'd love to see more and more people giving up or eating meat and dairy products altogether, or certainly reducing it, because that is also a cause of huge climate change emissions into the atmosphere. So if you are concerned about that, I think that's what people should be considering that could be done. But I think if we have this holistic approach, though, in terms of how we use the monetary system, how we actually deploy the spare capacity that we have for the greater good, we could be reducing the working week. I mean, John Maynard Keynes made a speech nearly 100 years ago in 1930. He said that my grandchildren will only be working a 15-hour week, and the point he was making was that because of the advance of new technology, etc., and mechanization, that would enable people to work, much, much less, as it were. Well, mechanization's come, of course, but the benefits of that have been accreted by the corporate elites, by the establishment, by the super rich. And I've been arguing, and when I was touring the country as part of the Democracy Roadshow to try and democratize the Labour Party, to put the members in charge, was that one of the things I was saying is, look, we should all become 21st century Luddites, because what the Luddites were saying wasn't that they were against technology per se, but what they were saying was that technology should be our servant, not our master. Absolutely. And that is true today as it was true then. And, if we could use that new technology for the benefit of the many, then we could create a good society. It's possible. It's just political will that's lacking.
Yes. There's a lot you said in there, Chris. Maybe one day you and I could have a whole conversation about climate change, because I've shifted my position about that. I agree with you about planting trees. Absolutely. Everybody loves trees, not controversial, and it deals with pollution, and they prevent flooding because they soak up the water and stuff. And just so you know, I have been a vegan for a year. I've been vegetarian for a year. Being a Pakistani vegan and vegetarian and visiting Pakistan is a very novel and interesting experience. Right?
Well, I listen. However, I must say, I was on a building site, and it was quite unusual to be on a building site in 1976 as a vegan as well. Anyway,
I'm no longer. For the last 11 years, I've been high fat, low carb, and I've been very, very meat. I'm sorry to say, right? That could be a whole other conversation, maybe.
Yeah.
But in terms of the trees and the pollution and the climate, where does the Workers' Party stand on 15-minute cities, ULEZ, LTN? Because if the central bank digital currencies, digital IDs, biometric passports, because I don't hear anything from the left on that.
No, indeed. I mean, I've not heard the Workers' Party express a specific view on that. I've got my own very grave concerns about the 15-minute city. So, on the face of it, it looks seductively positive, and something that you'd.
It's a lie.
Yes, I appreciate that. No. Listen, I mean, I host a program, a weekly podcast called Resistance TV, which was set up when we created the Resist movement, and we've discussed this on the program. Actually, you can look it up if you want. We've had a guy in one of the towns that been earmarked, for this 15-minute city to actually speak on the program about it. So no, absolutely, we do need to be very and also the central bank digital currencies. These are things which are we do need to be very vigilant about. Again, on the face of it, it can look, this is going to be much more convenient, etc. I mean, I've actually started to use cash now a lot more. I mean, I went probably for, 15 or 20 years, I used to have a reputation for never having any cash on me. I would always kind of use a card, But we need to be very careful about that, because if the central bank digital currency were to come in, that puts enormous power, in the hands of the elites of the government, and they can just close you down, and certainly oppositional voices, certainly the left, I think would be absolutely targeted. And this is one of the things why I think the left should always be in favour of free speech, because I see that, for example, when I was over in the States, trying to kind of close down Donald Trump, but these things are then have a habit of coming back to bite you, and ultimately ends up, the left, voices are censored as a consequence. I mean, my voice has been censored. I mean, although since Elon Musk, for example, has taken over Twitter, I'm no longer shadow banned, and the absurd title, which was or description of me, which was put onto my Twitter page that I was Iran state affiliated media, that's been removed as well, and so now my numbers have started to increase again, and more importantly, the reach of stuff that I put out now is substantially increased compared to where it was. But it's not just on the social media where I was facing that sort of close down. I was and still am, in fact, cancelled from speaking at lots of. I mean, there's not a university campus, I think, that I'm able to speak at. I mean, for example, I was due to speak at the Oxford Union, I think a couple of years ago, about veganism, believe it or not, and I got cancelled from that. And this is because of my stance on Palestine, and the criticism of the bogus anti-Semitism, a crisis that the Zionist lobby were perpetuating, and are continuing to do so. In fact, we're going to be speaking about this again on Resistance TV, the next episode of Resistance TV. And there's a guy who's been a scout leader for many years, but he's a strong 20 years, I think. In fact, he started it when his kids were in the Scouts, and he continued as a volunteer. He's just been booted out because of his position on Zionism. He's very critical of the IHRA, etc. He's quite a prominent anti-Zionist campaigner, and he's been kicked out because of that. So it permeates huge areas of society, and I think the biggest mistake that Jeremy Corbyn made was to try to appease the unappeasable Zionist lobby. And
unappeasable Blairites, who were just out.
Well, no. Well, it was the Blairites as well. But, I mean, many of them are Zionists, but also those who aren't necessarily Zionists piggybacked and used that, piggybacked on the whole anti-Semitism scam, and used that as a stick to attack Jeremy and to attack his supporters, and to destroy the Corbyn project. That's what held Jeremy and the Corbyn project below the waterline. And then the coup de grace, which we've already mentioned, was the commitment to the second referendum. On the European Union.
I'm conscious of the time because I know you got another appointment. I want to make two very quick things. So one is the problem. I completely agree with you with regards to freedom of speech, but there's also freedom of movement, because if the 15-minute cities come in and they are sustained, we will have the equivalent of South Africa's pass laws, where we need to show a digital pass, and it prevents people from organizing and protesting. That's where it's really, really dangerous.
Well, listen, knowledge is power, isn't it? So, this point I was making earlier about raising political consciousness, I mean, provide people with the facts, and then I think people will make sensible, logical conclusions, or come to sensible, logical conclusions. And that's why, as Tony Benn once said, democracy is the most revolutionary thing in the world. And I found that out to my cost when I tried to democratise the Labour Party, because I was unceremoniously booted out. That was one of the main reasons. Obviously, the Zionist lobby was also instrumental.
I think they were using that false charges of anti-Semitism to get rid of you.
Oh yeah, of course. I was told by one prominent Labour MP that I was giving the Parliamentary Labour Party a collective nervous breakdown because of my democratisation agenda, which would have made them accountable to members. And it was also leaked to me that one MP had put in a private chat group that she was thinking about organising a crowdfunding exercise to have me assassinated. And when she was challenged about that, she said, "What? Because I'm planning a painful murder?" I mean, I think it was a sick joke type of thing, but it just sort of shows the level to which they sunk. Now, imagine if that was somebody on the left or a Jeremy Corbyn supporter had said that about a prominent right winger. I mean, it would have been all over the front page of the national newspapers. It would have been leading on all the broadcast media, but there was nothing said about the fact that I was earmarked for assassination, as it were. But anyway, yeah. But as you say, I mean, I do have another appointment, so we probably.
Where can people find you?
Well, follow me on my social media on Twitter. That's probably the best place to get me, which is Darby Chris W. It's at Darby Chris W on Twitter, but I'm also on Facebook. Just look for Chris Williamson. I've got 2 pages. I've got a personal page and a personal feed, should I say, and then a kind of political page, as it were. So yeah, either of those. Just look for Chris Williamson Facebook, former politician.
Great. Chris, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on again because I think there's so much more we could talk into and dig into. Really appreciate it. Anybody watching, comments, questions, put them in the description below. And between now and when I see you next, please keep filling your pockets with freedom. This is Chris Williamson and Crypto Rich signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.
Yes, good luck. Bye-bye.